There's a headline from Australia. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is urged to call emergency meeting after Trump administration cuts funding to 7 Australian universities. The administration's move came after U.S. agencies asked Australian researchers to justify why they should continue receiving American research grants. The surveys they received asked several questions, including whether the researchers had received funding from China and if their university has recognized only 2 sexes, male and female. The institutions which have had their funding cut are the Australian National University, Monash University, University of Technology Sydney, University of New South Wales, Charles Darwin University, Macquarie University, the University of New South, UNSW. I'm assuming that, too, is the University of New South Wales, so maybe they're listed differently. In any event, you've got multiple universities that are losing $600 million from the United States. Now, I am not generally opposed to foreign aid. I don't know why we are funding $600 million to Australian universities unless we get the research, unless we get the data, if it helps us. Now, you should understand that one of the things China does is China writes grants to universities around the world, and then China gets all the research, the bleeding edge research, and China uses that for research and development. And it's one of the reasons China is eating into us when it comes to advances in technology and in artificial intelligence. You may not like spending money abroad, but you got to understand that sometimes it's useful, particularly if some of these universities are doing cutting-edge scientific stuff. And we want that research, and we don't want China to have it. It's worth spending the money, I think. But if it's like doing research on transgender monkeys, why bother? Democrats need to understand that Americans generally are not opposed to cutting foreign aid because they don't feel the foreign aid. And this is the big thing about foreign aid. It's not actually a significant part of the U.S. budget. It's only a couple percentage points. But there's no constituency for it in the United States. Ugandans don't vote. So when you cut money from Uganda, you're not going to have voter problems in this country. In fact, most voters, even people who descend from people from Uganda, are okay cutting the federal budget when it comes to foreign aid. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram, however, has this story. The Tarrant Area Food Bank is turning to local support now that it faces a combined deficit of $4.2 million due to the ending of federal food assistance programs. That equates to 2.5 million meals for families across North Texas. The nonprofit acts as a regional clearinghouse for donated food, serving Fort Worth and 13 surrounding counties. It is responsible for distributing a mix of fresh, frozen, and shelf-stable products to a network of hunger relief charities and social services organizations. The Trump administration is freezing over $1 billion in pandemic-era spending for schools and food banks 6 months before the programs were scheduled to end. The U.S. Department of Agriculture announced March 10th that it's cutting the initiatives. The programs cut were Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement and the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement, which helps schools and food banks pay for food sourced from local farmers, respectively. The services, which help make up 30% of the food bank's purchasing budget, have been axed. The programs have been cut in an effort to bring nutrition programs out of the COVID era. Now, I want you to note a couple of things first before you get all upset about it. The programs were going to end in 6 months anyway. These were COVID funding programs when a lot of people were out of work because of COVID, and they've been slowly winding down. The Biden administration dragged winding them all down, putting it on the burden of the next administration, and the Trump administration decided to cut them 6 months early. My father-in-law manages a soup kitchen. He is retired. He's an engineer, went to Georgia Tech, runs a soup kitchen. And they sometimes struggle to find volunteers to help. It's a burden. You got to get in there early, and you got to cook meals for over 100 people. You have to learn the food safety laws. For example, you can't have raw meats in a refrigerator above raw vegetables. The vegetables got to be on top for food safety. You got to make sure your refrigerator's at a certain temperature. You got to keep stuff segregated. You can't leave stuff out for a long time. You got to learn all that stuff. You volunteer. You work up the ladder. The more you work up the ladder, the longer you've been there, the more compliance you have to have. And you're a volunteer. You're not paid. You're a volunteer. It gets hard to find volunteers. I don't have a problem with the government cutting funds to food banks. If you listen to this program on a regular basis, you know we fundraise every year for food banks. During Thanksgiving, we fundraise Hungry for a Day. We raise a lot of money to feed a lot of families for Thanksgiving. I love supporting food banks and food pantries. I love supporting soup kitchens. I love to cook. It's a great way to tie it in to help people in need who are hungry. I don't have a problem with the government stopping this. Here's my problem. My problem is that in this country for decades, the churches played this role. And as the federal government got bigger and bigger, fewer and fewer churches played a role. And now, frankly, the churches that play the role in feeding the stomach are the ones less likely to feed the soul. It's all these progressive theological organizations and supposedly Christian denominations that aren't very Christian anymore that bring in the homeless people, feed them, and then share a false gospel with them. And a lot of evangelical, Orthodox, Bible-believing churches have just flat out abandoned helping the needy in their own community. They go to Haiti, they go to Mexico, they go to Africa, they build huts and houses and schools, and they don't really care about the hungry in their own backyard because that's the government's responsibility now. We don't need to worry about it. And churches, Bible-believing churches, have abandoned their role to their own community, and they're no longer seeking the welfare of the community in which they live and praying for it. They're going abroad. They're sending their kids on spring break trips to foreign countries that have a beach, letting the kids wear their swim clothes while they work out. I'm sorry, I got a big problem with it within the church. And I've got a real problem with it with local communities now deciding, you know what, instead of us building a relationship in our local communities for local people to understand what we need for our local community, we're just going to outsource to the federal government. And so instead of getting the donations of local people, we're going to rely on federal taxpayer dollars. And I think that's a terrible thing. I think it's a really bad thing when any food bank anywhere is so dependent on federal dollars. They're not even working to build up their relationships with their local communities. Seek the welfare of the city in which you live and pray for it, for there you will find your welfare. If you live in North Texas, if you live near Tarrant County, if you live near Fort Worth, I hope you're writing checks to the local food bank. They need your help. Julie Butner, the president and CEO of the Tarrant Area Food Bank, says the organization's been able to maintain balanced supply and distribution through local food purchase agreements. The food bank has received supplemental food purchasing assistance from the Commodity Credit Corp, the government agency created to protect farm income and prices. Now they're going to have a deficit. They're going to hurt unless the local people stand up and help. And this is part of the issue here. We've got $35 trillion in national debt, but everything other than foreign aid has a constituency here. You cut the local food bank, people in the local community get upset. Why aren't the people in the local community funding the food bank? Why aren't the local businesses? I mean, the Dallas-Fort Worth area has massive numbers of Fortune 500 companies. Why aren't they writing the checks instead of the taxpayers across the nation writing the checks? It's not cruel and heartless. It's seeking the welfare of the community in which you live. I raise money every year for food banks across this country for Thanksgiving to be able to provide meals for families in need. I don't think we as a people should be relying on the government for this stuff. Frankly, I wish more evangelical churches in this country would get into doing this sort of thing instead of sending their kids abroad on mission trips. There's a mission field in your own backyard, churches. You've ceded that mission field to the social gospel churches that spread a false gospel that want to bring heaven to earth and not you to heaven. There's a role for an evangelical church to play in this. But the larger issue here so often is outside of the Catholic Church, we've all gotten dependent on the government doing this stuff. The government takes care of it. The government funds the food bank. The government funds the schools. The government takes care of the poor. The government takes care of the needy. The government takes care of all these things, except the government can't take care of any of us right now because the government's $35 trillion in debt. We should be taking care of each other. But we've all abdicated our responsibility to Washington, D.C. And notice I say we all. I'll include myself in it. And the government can't do it all anymore. The government has to cut back. And it seems like an area where the government could cut back is in funding local food banks where the local people, the local businesses, the local taxpayers, the local government, they can step up and do it. But also, so many of these organizations have gotten so much money from COVID. COVID is now over, people. Yes, people are still getting COVID. I have a relative the other day we were going to go see. We had to cancel a trip because he got COVID. But the government poured tons of money into the economy, into local food banks and the like because of COVID, and some of that money hadn't been spent. Call it back now. Save the money. Get a lot of these entities that were able to spend a lot of money because of COVID spending, get them reined in and more responsible for their budgets as well. I don't know that that's happening to this food bank. I'll assume that it's not happening to this food bank. But I know plenty of entities that got a lot of extra money during COVID that let their budgets get out of whack because they just got so used to all the extra money. But y'all, it's time for us to step up locally and help. If you live in the Fort Worth area, consider donating to the food bank there. If you live in Palm Beach, Florida, consider donating to your local food bank there. Orlando, the same thing. Atlanta, the same thing. Sacramento, the same thing. Austin, the same thing. Donate to your local food bank. There are hungry people in your community. They could use your help. But if you're a food bank, start building your relationships with your local businesses. Start building your relationship with your local donors. Stop relying on Washington, D.C. All of us have got to do a better job of being local and not being dependent on Washington, D.C. Our schools, our businesses, our nonprofits, they need to be local because in a local place, you know the needs of the local community better than Washington, D.C. This isn't a bad thing that Washington is cutting back money to food banks and nonprofits around the country. It is an opportunity for the food banks and the local nonprofits to actually be known in their local community, to be seen as helping, and to rely on the charity of others in their local community instead of the taxpayers of Washington, D.C., who no longer have the money to be able to fund all of these things while also trying to pay down a national debt. This is not a bad thing. This is a real opportunity, and we should all be treating it as an opportunity for us in this country to be committed to our local cities, our local states, our local counties, our local food banks, our local nonprofits. We should all be seeking the welfare of the cities in which we live because there we'll find our welfare, and stop letting everyone rely on Washington, D.C. to take care of all of it for us, abdicating our own responsibility for our local government. This is not a bad thing. It is an opportunity.